Grace and peace and blessings, Connected Church fam. This is Charles Botts, the founder and pastor here at My Connected Church, and I want to welcome you into another Connected podcast. This is the weekly Bible study of Connected Church. Our website is myconnectedchurch.com. We'd encourage you to visit. You can download this latest podcast as well as get access to all of our content, including our Sunday sessions, our midweek recharge, and even archives of Connected Kids, our children's church ministry. So we definitely want to encourage you to stop by myconnectedchurch.com. Fill out an information card if it's your first time visiting the site. Let us know that you stopped by and said, hey, we'd love to reach out and stay in touch with you. Express to you our feelings and excitement about having you check out what we're doing. This week we are going to look at the first part of Job, and I don't actually think that this will be a longer podcast. It actually may be a little bit shorter than our typical length because we actually covered quite a bit Sunday we maybe went a little longer than we normally do for that format and broadcast. The Lord was absolutely speaking. There was a lot that we wanted to share, and so we may have gone a little bit longer this past Sunday, but we also were ministering from the heart of God and sharing, I think, some insight that was very beneficial and a blessing to anyone that had an opportunity, certainly to listen live, or if you've had an opportunity to download or listen to the recorded broadcast. I think it's going to be a real blessing to you. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be walking through the book of Job. There's so much to learn from this master work of literature. Just a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing. You've got narrative, you've got poetry, you have metaphor and alliteration, and you have so much imagery packed into this one book, and so much here for us to learn. A couple things we pointed out Sunday, if you haven't had an opportunity to check out Sunday session for Connecting, where we kick off the series on Job. I want to encourage you to give it a listen, to download it. Go to myconnectedchurch.com, go to youtube.com, and search My Connected Church. And you want to grab Sunday, October 3rd. You want to grab that message. One of the things that we pointed out, and that quite a bit of research has uncovered for us, is that, and some things are quite obvious and quite apparent when you read it. Right in the opening line, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And so right there in chapter 1, verse 1, we know that Job was not a Jew. Job was not an Israelite. He was not a Hebrew. The land of Uz was not part of Canaan, was not part of the land that God had given to a promise to Abraham, and that eventually Moses and Joshua then led God's people to. So we know that Job was not an Israelite, was not a Hebrew. What's also unique about this book is that it references no other detail, historical event, no other occurrence in the rest of, in particular, the Hebrew scrolls. There's no mention of any other event or a happening that is later described in any of the other works that are part of the Hebrew scrolls, what we call the Old Testament. And so that has led quite a few scholars to conclude, in fact, that Job may be one of the earliest books to be written, and that the events appear to predate anything else that's been recorded outside of certainly creation. And so that, I think that's interesting to ponder, that here it is potentially, theoretically, so early in biblical history, if you will. And here is a man outside of the covenant of Abraham, outside of the law given to the people by God through Moses. Outside of those things, not mentioned in the garden, not mentioned as part of the fall from the garden and the generations that came from Seth and on down to Noah, not mentioned and not mentioned post Noah, after Noah and his family get off the boat and Noah's descendants gather and spread and populate, not mentioned in any of those areas. And so that has then led many to draw the conclusion, or at least to ponder and consider, is the book of Job, really just one long parable? Is it the author, who's also unknown? Some will say it's Moses. Some consider that it could be Solomon. Some consider that it could be one of the other prophets. But whoever it may be, there is a lot of energy around the notion that this book just may be one long proverb. And so I think that's something to consider. I think it's something to look at and contemplate. In either case, whether Job actually lived and lived and the events recorded in this book did actually take place, or if they're not, if it is a fiction of sorts, again, that's meant to be a parable, it's meant to serve to be an illustration, a way to learn as to the nature of God's relationship with humanity, humanity's relationship with God, humanity's relationship with each other, and the role that the accuser plays in all of that. I think whether it is a parable or if it's historical record, there's still quite a bit to learn. There's still quite a bit to learn from the book, and so that is why we're going to take these next 3 weeks and really dive in and peel back the layers and hopefully grow together. One of the things that we looked at extensively Sunday was this very interesting description of what happens in the heavenly throne room, in the heavenly courtroom, if you will, where there is a convening of celestial bodies, of heavenly beings that many refer to as the divine council. And in chapter 1, verse 6, Scripture says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan," the Hebrew word is Satan, "also came among them." And the word Satan means accuser. And what we talked about Sunday is that this is a title. This is not actually a name. That the English versions, the English English translations, we have made it into a name. We've turned it into a proper noun. But the original Hebrew, Satan, is a noun. It's not a proper noun. It's a regular noun, and it means accuser, or one who opposes. And so the accuser is also a part of this convening of God's divine council, of God's heavenly courtroom, if you will. And I drew the illustration of thinking as the accuser as a district attorney, as a lead prosecutor that spends his days, spends his time trying to make a case against humanity, trying to make the case that every human is not worthy and therefore should be cut down and destroyed, because the accuser, Satan, takes the tactic, if I can't have it, nobody can. And And so there is this interesting exchange where the Lord asks the accuser where he's been, and the accuser says that he's been throughout the earth looking for individuals to accuse. And God proactively offers up Job as an example of someone who's above reproach, who's righteous, who's blameless, and therefore worthy of consideration, worthy of Satan's consideration. And the accuser responds fairly straightforward and says, essentially accuses Job, does what he does, and accuses Job of being only in it for what God can give him, for what God can do. He said if you, the accuser accused Job of being materialistic and being selfish, and so the accuser takes the tactic. Look, if he's so great, and if he's truly righteous, then he will praise you even if he doesn't have any of his stuff. And so we get a bit of a I don't know if it's a window, I don't know if that's appropriate, a peek behind the curtain. There is this sense that we can get, particularly during the time of the Old Testament, there is this sense that the accuser was absolutely regularly presenting names before God, regularly presenting names, presenting outfits, individuals putting on airs or putting on pretense, whatever the case may be, but the point is that the accuser, the enemy, the adversary, was and still continues to look for ways and opportunities to bring accusation, to make a case. And so his case against Job was he's selfish. He's only celebrating you. He only acknowledges you because you do things for him. You take away his health. You take away his family. Take away his kids. What is he left with? Well, he's left with very, very little. Then let's see if he really serves God. Let's see if he truly is righteous. And so then the Lord says in verse 12, and the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch your hand. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Left the presence of the Lord. Now there was a day again when the sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine. This is Job's sons and daughters who were given to feasting, and they were given to much celebration. So there was a day when Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them. So make a note, please make a note. Stay with me. If you want to circle, you want to highlight, you want to underline verses 14 and 15. The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans. The Sabaeans were a group of raiders. These were nasty guys, not really to be messed with. And the Sabaeans. Now there was a day when the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So the Sabaeans came and murdered. I was trying to find a better way to say it. There really isn't. Murdered his family, Job's family. Murdered his children. Murdered his oxen and his donkeys, which was a significant portion of his wealth. So these Sabaeans come upon these animals and just wipe them all out. Verse 16, while he was yet talking, there came another and said, the fire of God. Do you see that? Underline that, highlight that, circle that. The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep, and the servants consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So one individual is tied up, is wrapped up, and the raiders come and destroy the oxen and the donkeys. The sheep, who, as you know, in Scripture, and this is, look, this may be a bit metaphoric, but that's okay. I think that there's some accuracy to this. The sheep, who often represent God's people, who represent God's children in Scripture, we are to model ourselves after sheep. The sheep are consumed by a power from God, by a fire from heaven. And so I think that's very interesting that all that Job was given was put into Satan's hand, and it turns out that the sheep were taken by a fire from heaven. Now let's keep reading. Let's look at this. Verse 16. Verse 17. And yet while he was speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. All right, so you had a group of raiders that killed, that murdered, that wiped out Job's barrels and Job's his harvest, Job's agricultural products. So the donkey and the oxen are killed by this group of raiders. A fire from heaven consumes the sheep. So it's no human intervention on that. A fire from heaven comes and consumes the sheep. Then another group of raiders, the Chaldeans, another group of raiders come out of nowhere, seemingly, and they destroy all the camel and the oxen. And so, you can imagine then that it's starting to get real heavy. At this point, the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans, 2 different individuals working through the resume, and then we come to the end. We come to the final section. So the resume would be section 4, I'm sorry. The Chaldeans, that took the camels and the Chaldeans took the camels, 3 groups, and made a raid on the camels and struck down all the servants. So you got the Sabaeans take the donkey and the oxen. You have the Chaldeans that take the camels. You have a fire from heaven that consumes the sheep. And then watch this in verse 18 and 19. And while he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughter were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So 2 natural disasters consume the sheep and consume his children. I think that that's really interesting. I think that that's worth some exploration. I think that's worth some examination. That the Sabaeans, which comes from the word Sheba, which means 7 or an oath, is a nation in southern Arabia. And then the Chaldeans, coming from the word chastity, and they're a group from a lower Mesopotamia bordering on the Persian Gulf. They take the camels. So you have these 2 separate groups of raiders that destroy the camels and the oxen and the donkeys. And then you have these seeming 2 acts of God that kill his children, his actual children, and the sheep, his metaphoric children. That sheep were that precious and they were that valuable. And again, there is clearly that connection between humanity being like sheep. And so what do we walk away from? What do we take from this? Well, my good friend Gordon Jackson many years ago theorized this notion that the enemy is using tactics. Remember, God said, He's in your hands. Do whatever you will, just leave Him. Don't touch His body. But whatever you want to do, do. And so even though the fire from heaven is described as a fire coming from God, it really was the accuser, the opposer, trying to mimic, I believe, and my friend Gordon believes, trying to mimic the power of God to shake Job's faith. Remember, Job's accusation, remember the case that he's trying to build, against Job is that Job is as committed to the Lord as the Lord continues to, in effect, fund Job's lifestyle. And the moment that Job doesn't feel fulfilled or rewarded or challenged, that his pieces, his work is not accepted, it's not rewarded, that things are absolutely falling apart, and the devil's accusation, Satan's accusation, is that if you take away all the material stuff, that Job will fall apart, because it's the material stuff that he really cares about, not righteousness. And God, knowing Job's heart, says, I'll absolutely take that. In fact, I'll let you do what you want to property around him, because I believe he is committed. And and I think that we see that. We see that at the end of chapter 1, of verses 20 through 22. And there's those verses that we know so well, starting in 21, and he said, verse 20, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Verse 22, last verse. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So, in a sense, after round 1, kind of Job and God win. That the accusation, the case the district attorney was trying to make was that Job would have to make considerable concessions to turn her back on what she's helped to discover. And so Job is in this place where he is just beside himself, but he does not sin. He's lost his children and his sheep seemingly to divine acts, to divinely orchestrated, divinely purposed actions, and Job does not sin. Job does not give in, and at least not initially. Now, we see some things happen in the next chapter. We see in chapter 2, there's a bit more attacks and an additional development. So he's lost his wealth at this point. He's lost his family at this point. Some to what would appear to be a divine act. Some what appeared to be just raiders, just humans being awful humans to one another. And so, in chapter 2, verse 1, after Job has said, naked I came in, naked I'll return, blessed is the name of the Lord, that just burned the accuser up, the oppressor, that burned him up. And so he goes back to God and he says, all right, you know what, fine. He didn't curse you yet because you're preserving his health. If you allow me to afflict his body, he'll curse you. He'll curse, he'll curse everything about you and won't want any parts. And once again, the accuser is wrong, and God knows his people, and so God says, "Sure, we'll take that." And so Job is afflicted. Job is afflicted with these awful sores, this awful ailment, and Job's wife, who herself is heartbroken. We don't get her name, but we have to know that she's devastated. She lost all her children. We all manage and cope with our grief differently, but this was a woman that lost all her kids the same day that Job lost all his. And she is doing her very, very best to compartmentalize, but she can't. It's very, very difficult. It's very trying. And so looking at her husband and all this pain and all this soreness, looking at his body, just sort of betray him and deteriorate, she says, I'm not gonna sit by. I'm not gonna sit by and watch this. I will visit, I will call, I will check in. I can't, And so she tells Job, curse God and die. If you're not going to say their names, if you're not going to put it out there, then you should just curse God. You should just curse God and die. And she's speaking from her pain. Again, she's speaking from her pain. She's speaking from her bitterness. When I was younger and naive, I was much harsher on Job's wife. I am not. I empathize. I empathize with the notion of just sort of going through your life and having that proverbial rug knocked out from underneath you. And some people don't ever come back. Some people don't ever come back from that. For some folks, just even losing one of the things that Josh lost would put them over the edge. And so Job is a mess. Job is just a hot mess, and so verse 9. Then his wife said, "Do you still hold fast to integrity? Curse God and die." Verse 10. Job says, "You speak as one of the foolish women who would speak. Shall we receive good from God?" That's an important line, important pickup there. Shall we receive good from God? And shall we not receive evil? In all this, God is not the same. In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. And then the chapter ends, and this is what we're going to actually pick up on Sunday. The chapter ends with the arrival of three friends. The chapter 2 ends with the arrival of three friends. Verse 11. Chapter 2, verse 11. Now when Job's three friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, they each came from their own place: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment together to come and to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And when they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their foreheads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw his suffering was great. So chapter 2 ends with the arrival of his friends. His friends heard what happened. His friends heard the terrible circumstances that in which Job found himself, and they're just beside themselves, and they want to spend time with their friend, and so they are and what's called sitting Shiva. It's an ancient Jewish custom. This notion of just sitting with someone who mourns. That if someone has suffered great loss, great pain, and they're mourning, that you take several days and you just sit with them, and you're responsive to their call. You respond to the need. You're not initiating anything. It is not necessarily a proactive practice, as it is a responsive practice to those that are hurting and in need. And so Job's friends sit with him, and in chapter 3, we kick things off. We kick it off in chapter 3 with Job finally breaking the silence. It's 7 days. They come and they sit with Job, and for 7 days, I wouldn't say he hardly missed them. I wouldn't say that. But there comes a point in time in the exchange where it's almost like, would we be better off if we were enemies? His friends just, they just really kind of get into it, because they come from a very clear sense of the world. And I think one of the things that gets really powerful is when we get to the end, is having that belief, having that notion, somewhat shaken, that that we have a lot of work to do as a people. We have a lot of work to do as a species to understand and appreciate what goes into being in relationship with God. What does that mean? What does it mean to have God have faith in you? And God was displaying his faith and his confidence in Job when he completely unsolicited put forward his name to the divine council and to the accuser, and then the accuser had to essentially make some preparations to bring forward his accent, and in 15 years, I think in some cases his youngest child is, there is some confusion or uncertainty about the age of his children, but what's clear is that Job was living a long, sustained, prosperous life. He was living long enough to see his children get grown enough to have dinner away from he and his wife. And so, I appreciate that Job had a lot to lose. And he's finding a way to do it, dare I say, with some grace, with some class. And I think that's important. And so Sunday we will pick it up with chapter 3. We'll pick it up with what Job says to initiate the conversation, and Eliphaz's response, and the patterns and what we learned from this back and forth. And so we'll be exploring that more Sunday. I told you, fam, this was going to be a little bit shorter. If you have not had an opportunity to download and check out Sunday's sessions for connecting, I would absolutely encourage you to do that. Go to youtube.com, search My Connected Church. Go to our website, myconnectedchurch.com, and we'd love to share and welcome and receive your feedback. Family, we are always grateful for your participation. We're always grateful for your investment. We're always grateful for your time. Do me a favor, please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in this fight. God bless you, fam.